My mother's voice echoed through the paramedic's phone, completely unaffected by the fact that I was bleeding out inside a crushed car. "Call me if she dies," she said, followed by the clinking of a champagne glass. That was the moment I realized the family I had spent my entire life trying to please would rather plan my funeral than show up to the emergency room. But they made one massive mistake. They assumed I would actually die, leaving them free to steal my home. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant who just learned that the most dangerous frauds are the ones sitting at your own dinner table. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally were actually your worst enemies. The nightmare began on Christmas Eve. A brutal blizzard was sweeping off Lake Michigan, burying Chicago under a thick blanket of ice. I was driving my SUV down a desolate stretch of highway, eager to get back to my penthouse. I had spent the past month uncovering a massive corporate embezzlement scheme at work, and I desperately needed a quiet holiday. The heater was blasting and the radio played a cheerful song. I felt a rare moment of peace. Then blinding headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A massive truck was tailgating me, riding dangerously close to my bumper. I tapped my brakes to signal the driver to back off, but the truck accelerated. It slammed into my rear bumper with terrifying force. The impact sent my vehicle spinning out of control across the black ice. The world turned upside down in a chaotic blur. Metal crunched glass shattered, and the airbags deployed with a deafening crack. My SUV rolled over twice before smashing directly into a concrete barrier. Silence fell over the highway, broken only by the howling wind and the hissing of my wrecked engine. Freezing winter air rushed into the cabin through the shattered windows. I tried to move, but a searing, agonizing pain ripped through my body. Both of my legs were pinned beneath the crushed dashboard, and my left arm hung at a grotesque angle. I could taste the sharp metallic tang of blood in my mouth. My chest felt incredibly heavy, and every breath was a struggle. I knew enough about trauma to recognize the signs of severe internal bleeding. I was entirely trapped inside a crumpled cage of steel. Panic set in as biting cold began to numb my extremities. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to fight off the overwhelming darkness creeping into the edges of my vision. Minutes felt like hours. I prayed for someone to find me before the freezing temperatures finished what the crash had started. Finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the stormy night. The flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles painted the falling snow in frantic colors. Footsteps crunched heavily on the ice as first responders rushed toward my mangled car. A paramedic wearing a neon jacket shined a bright flashlight into my eyes. "Stay with me, miss," he shouted over the roaring wind. "We are going to get you out of here. Do not close your eyes." The rescue equipment roared to life, biting into the twisted metal of my door. The sound was deafening, a harsh mechanical grinding that vibrated through my shattered bones. As they worked to cut me free, another paramedic climbed into the back seat to stabilize my neck. His hands were quick and professional, but his face was grim. He checked my pulse and immediately began barking orders to his partner. "Her blood pressure is dropping fast," he yelled. "We have major internal bleeding here. We need to airlift her to Chicago Memorial Hospital right now, or she is not going to make it." They pulled my purse from the passenger side, digging through it for identification. The paramedic found my corporate badge and my premium credit card, both snapped in half from the sheer force of the collision. He read my name aloud. "Audrey, can you hear me? We found your phone. We need to call your emergency contact. We are calling your mother, Beverly." I desperately wanted to scream to tell him to put the phone down. I knew my mother. I knew she was happily hosting her holiday party with my sister Madison and Jamal. I knew my mother cared more about her party guests than my very existence. But I was choking on my own warm blood, unable to form the words to stop him. He hit the dial button and waited for her to answer. The phone rang on speakerphone, a sharp tone echoing against the howling blizzard outside. But the call instantly dropped as the paramedic lost cellular signal in the severe storm. "Damn it, no service out here," he muttered, tossing my blood-stained phone onto the stretcher. "There is no time to keep trying anyway. We have to move her right now." Before I could process the relief of not hearing my mother dismiss my injuries, agonizing pain surged through my body. The rescue crew finally pried the crumpled roof off my SUV with a deafening screech of tearing metal. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders and legs, lifting me onto a rigid backboard. The freezing winter air bit into my exposed skin, but the cold was quickly replaced by blinding agony. I gasped, choking on the metallic taste of blood as they hoisted me into the back of the ambulance. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the raging storm. Bright fluorescent lights glared above me, making my head throb. The ambulance lurched forward, its tires spinning on the icy highway before catching traction. The siren wailed, a frantic scream that matched the panic rising in my chest. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the world blurring into a chaotic montage of hurried voices and sharp movements. The paramedic who had found my purse was now furiously working to save my life. He shouted vital numbers and medical jargon to the driver, his hands moving rapidly as he applied heavy pressure to my abdomen. I could feel the cold rush of intravenous fluids entering my arm, but my body was going numb. Every bump in the road sent fresh shock waves of pain through my shattered legs. I tried to focus on the ceiling to stay awake, but the darkness kept pulling me under. I remember the violent halt of the ambulance and the sudden rush of freezing air as the back doors flew open. A team of trauma nurses and emergency doctors surrounded me in seconds, their voices a synchronized chorus of urgency. "We have a 33-year-old female blunt force trauma, severe internal bleeding," the paramedic shouted as they rolled my stretcher through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room. "Her blood pressure is tanking." The bright lights of the hospital ceiling rushed past my eyes in a dizzying blur. They moved me into a trauma bay, cutting away my ruined winter clothes with thick medical scissors. Needles pierced my skin, and the chaotic symphony of electronic heart monitors filled the small room. The rhythmic beeping of my heart rate grew dangerously slow, a terrifying warning that my body was simply giving up. A senior trauma nurse took my belongings from the paramedic, dumping the contents of my designer purse onto a metal tray. The pieces of my shattered black Amex card and my heavy metal corporate badge clattered loudly against the steel surface. She glanced at the badge, her eyes widening slightly at the prestigious accounting firm logo printed on the front. "She is a senior forensic accountant," the nurse announced to the crowded room, noting my official title. "This woman clearly has a serious career. Someone needs to get her emergency contact on the line immediately. We need family consent for emergency surgery, or she might not make it through the next hour." Another nurse grabbed my cracked phone from the tray, plugging it into a charging cable to bypass the rapidly dying battery. I desperately wanted to tell them it was completely useless. I wanted to explain that the toxic people they were trying to reach would not care about my prestigious career or the terrifying fact that I was dying on their sterile table. My mother only cared about appearances, and my sister Madison only cared about herself. But my throat was completely raw, and a thick plastic oxygen mask covered my mouth. I could only watch helplessly as the young nurse scrolled through my phone contacts. She quickly found the emergency listing for my mother, Beverly. I closed my eyes as she dialed the number from the hospital landline, silently praying the winter storm would block the call once again. The monitor beside my bed beeped frantically, signaling another massive drop in my vital signs. A trauma doctor shouted for an immediate blood transfusion, his voice cutting through the clinical chaos. I felt a heavy, suffocating darkness washing over my exhausted mind, completely dulling my senses. The physical pain slowly began to recede, replaced by a terrifying coldness that started deep in my chest and spread outward. The absolute last thing I heard before slipping into unconsciousness was the nurse speaking into the phone receiver, her voice tight with professional urgency, as the call finally connected to my family. "Hello, is this Beverly?" The nurse asked loudly, holding the receiver close to her mouth so her voice could carry over the chaotic beeping of the trauma bay monitors. "I am calling from the emergency room at Chicago Memorial Hospital. We have your daughter Audrey here. She has been in a catastrophic car accident." Through the thick haze of my failing consciousness, the hospital sounds seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the tinny audio of the speakerphone. On the other end of the line, there was no gasp of horror. There was no panicked screaming. Instead, the loud, unmistakable sounds of an extravagant holiday party filled the sterile room. I could hear a Christmas carol, the rich laughter of wealthy guests, and the sharp clinking of champagne flutes. "Yes, this is Beverly." My mother answered, her tone dripping with intense irritation rather than maternal concern. "What has she done now?" "I swear if she got pulled over for driving on the ice again, I am not paying for the impound fee. We are in the middle of a very important toast." The young trauma nurse blinked, exchanging a stunned look with the lead surgeon. You do not understand." The nurse pressed, her voice trembling slightly with disbelief. "Audrey was not pulled over. She was T-boned by a massive truck on the highway, and her vehicle rolled multiple times. She is suffering from massive internal bleeding and compound fractures. Her blood pressure is critically low. We need your immediate verbal consent to take her into emergency surgery right now. If we do not operate in the next 10 minutes, she is going to pass away." Silence stretched over the phone line, save for the festive jazz music that had replaced the previous song. For one desperate, naive second, my fading mind thought the shock had simply paralyzed her. I thought my mother was processing the horrific reality that her oldest daughter was lying on a metal table, covered in freezing blood, fighting for her last breath. Then I heard my sister Madison laugh brightly in the background of the call, followed by Jamal's deep, booming voice asking someone to pass the caviar. "Listen to me very carefully," my mother finally said, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper so her guests would not overhear. Audrey has always been a dramatic attention seeker. She knew perfectly well that tonight was the launch of Jamal's new real estate venture and Madison's big Christmas gala. She purposely skipped the dinner because she was jealous of her sister's success, and now she is pulling this stunt to ruin their special night. I am not falling for her manipulation. The entire trauma team froze. The surgeon actually stopped wiping the blood from my abdomen, staring at the phone receiver in absolute shock. I lay there trapped inside a broken body, feeling a coldness sink into my soul that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. The physical agony of my shattered legs paled in comparison to the realization that my own mother believed my fatal car crash was merely a petty attempt to steal the spotlight from my sister. "Ma'am, your daughter is literally dying," the surgeon barked, leaning over the nurse to shout directly into the phone. "This is not a joke or a stunt. Her liver is lacerated. We need your legal consent for a massive blood transfusion and immediate surgical intervention. Are you coming to the hospital or not?" My mother sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of profound inconvenience. "I am the hostess of an event with local politicians and millionaires," she replied coldly. "I cannot just leave because Audrey forgot how to drive in the snow. You are doctors. Do your jobs and fix her." "But we need you here," the nurse pleaded desperately. "What if the worst happens? What if she does not make it through the operation?" The background noise on the phone swelled as someone clinked a spoon against a glass, calling for a toast. My mother let out a small, irritated huff. "Look, I am busy," Beverly snapped, her voice devoid of a single ounce of human empathy. "She ruined Madison and Jamal's Christmas party. Call me if she dies." A sharp click echoed through the room. The line went completely dead. A sickening silence fell over the trauma bay. The medical staff stood paralyzed, completely stunned by the sheer cruelty they had just witnessed. A mother had just sentenced her daughter to death over a holiday toast. Then the lead surgeon shook his head, his eyes hardening with fierce determination. "To hell with the hospital protocol," he ordered loudly. "We are taking her up to the main operating room. Move quickly and prep the emergency trauma suite right now." The violent shudder that ripped through my body had nothing to do with my crushed limbs or my failing liver. It was the sheer suffocating weight of my mother's betrayal crashing down on my chest. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a fraction of the affection she freely showered on Madison. I paid for my sister's college tuition when my parents claimed they could not afford it. I bought my mother the designer bag she flaunted to her country club friends. I sacrificed my own happiness, my own peace of mind, just to be tolerated in their perfect family picture. And yet, lying on a metal table bleeding out from a catastrophic accident, I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a minor annoyance ruining their festive holiday toast. The monitor beside my head began to shriek a high-pitched, continuous alarm that cut through the frantic shouts of the medical team. My heart rate was plummeting, dropping from a weak flutter to a dangerously slow crawl. The emotional shock had severed my final tether to the physical world. Why should I fight to survive when the people who brought me into this world did not care if I left it? The agonizing pain radiating from my shattered legs and the sharp burn in my abdomen suddenly began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of heavy, dark exhaustion. I stopped fighting the heavy plastic oxygen mask strapped to my face. I stopped trying to draw breath. It was so much easier to just let go. "We are losing her!" The lead surgeon bellowed, his voice sounding warped and distant, like he was yelling from underwater. "Push another round of epinephrine right now. Do not wait for the elevator. We are taking the service doors." The wheels of my stretcher slammed violently against the floor tiles as the trauma team sprinted down the brightly lit hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights overhead strobed wildly across my vision. Nurses were running alongside me, holding IV bags high in the air, their faces pale with pure adrenaline and fear. But their frantic efforts felt completely detached from me. The cold darkness was creeping up my neck, silencing the chaos around me. I felt a strange floatiness. I was dying. The realization did not bring panic. It brought a twisted sense of relief. At least I would not have to see the look of mild annoyance on my mother's face at my funeral. The stretcher abruptly slowed down as they reached the double doors of the surgical wing. A nurse fumbled with the electronic keypad, cursing loudly under her breath when her slicked fingers slipped off the buttons. In that brief, agonizing pause, the chaotic movement around me seemed to freeze. The shouting faded into a dull hum. Through my half-open eyelids, the harsh hospital lights cast long, distorted shadows across the hallway. From the edge of my rapidly blurring vision, a figure stepped out of the periphery and approached the side of my stretcher. The medical staff did not seem to notice him, or perhaps they were simply too distracted by my failing heart monitor to care about a civilian standing in the surgical corridor. He leaned over me, blocking out the blinding overhead lights. I could not see his face clearly. His features were hidden in the shadows of the hallway, but I could see the distinct texture of a heavy black leather coat draped over his broad shoulders. The faint scent of expensive cologne and winter pine cut through the overwhelming stench of my own blood and hospital antiseptics. He reached out his hand, moving with calm, deliberate purpose amidst the medical frenzy. I felt the smooth, cold leather of his glove gently brush against my bare shoulder. The touch was grounding, sending a tiny electric jolt through my numb body. He leaned closer, his face mere inches from my ear. His voice was a deep, resonant whisper that vibrated with a strange, fierce intensity. It was the exact opposite of my mother's cold indifference. "Do not close your eyes," he commanded softly, his words cutting through the thick fog of my fading consciousness. "Do not let them win this easily. They are not worth dying for." The heavy double doors of the operating room finally swung open with a loud crash. The trauma team surged forward, pushing my stretcher into the freezing, brightly lit surgical suite. The man in the black leather coat stepped back into the shadows, disappearing from my line of sight as quickly as he had appeared. I tried to turn my head to find him, but the anesthesia mask was slammed aggressively over my face. A sweet gas flooded my lungs. The stranger's voice echoed in my mind as the darkness swallowed me. When I finally opened my eyes, the world was no longer a frantic blur of terrifying noises and blinding lights. Instead, I was greeted by the soft, rhythmic hum of advanced medical equipment and the gentle glow of morning sunlight filtering through thick velvet curtains. The heavy scent of blood and winter pine was gone, replaced by the sterile but faint smell of lavender and hospital-grade bleach. I blinked slowly, trying to clear the lingering fog of anesthesia from my heavy brain. I was lying in a massive mechanical bed, but this was not the chaotic trauma bay. The room was incredibly spacious, featuring mahogany wall panels, a private seating area, and a large flat-screen television. It looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a standard hospital room. I tried to shift my weight, but my body immediately protested with a dull, agonizing ache. I looked down and saw the extensive physical damage. Both of my legs were encased in heavy plaster casts, elevated on thick foam wedges. My left arm was immobilized in a complex metal brace pinned securely against my chest. Various wires and transparent tubes snaked out from beneath my thin hospital gown, connecting me to a towering machine of glowing monitors. I was alive. The mysterious stranger in the black coat had told me not to let them win, and somehow I had actually survived against all medical odds. The heavy wooden door to the suite clicked open, and a warm-faced nurse walked in holding a digital tablet. When she saw my open eyes, she stopped dead in her tracks and let out a loud gasp of pure relief. "Oh, thank goodness you are awake," she exclaimed, rushing over to check my vital signs. "We were starting to get very worried about you, Audrey. You have been in a medically induced coma for exactly 14 days. Your body endured catastrophic trauma from the crash, and the surgical team had to rebuild your left femur and repair massive lacerations to your liver. You are incredibly lucky to be breathing right now. 14 days." The words echoed in my mind like a heavy iron bell. I had missed Christmas entirely. I had missed the New Year. I had spent 2 entire weeks hovering on the absolute edge of death while my mother and sister were probably sipping expensive champagne and complaining about my absence. I opened my dry mouth to ask for a glass of water, but before I could utter a single raspy syllable, the door swung open again. This time, a tall, severe-looking woman wearing a tailored gray business suit marched into the room. She carried a thick manila folder and possessed the cold, calculating demeanor of someone who dealt exclusively with numbers rather than human lives. She did not offer a warm smile or express any relief that I had just woken from a 2-week coma. "Good morning, Miss Audrey," the woman said, her tone brisk and entirely devoid of empathy. "I am Rebecca from the hospital billing and administration department. I apologize for the intrusion so soon after your awakening, but we have a highly urgent financial matter to discuss regarding your extended stay here at Chicago Memorial." I frowned, confused by her aggressive timing. As a senior forensic accountant, I understood the ruthless nature of corporate bureaucracy, but confronting a patient who had literally just opened her eyes seemed extreme, even by American healthcare standards. I gestured weakly to my throat, signaling that I could not speak well. The nurse quickly handed me a small cup of ice chips, allowing me to soothe my raw vocal cords. "What is the problem?" I rasped, my voice sounding like crushed gravel. "I have premium health insurance through my accounting firm." "Your premium health insurance unfortunately has a strict out-of-network trauma cap," Rebecca replied, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "And because you required a specialized medevac helicopter airlift during a severe blizzard, followed by 3 emergency reconstructive surgeries and 14 days in our highest-tier VIP recovery suite, your expenses have far exceeded that cap." She stepped forward and placed a detailed, itemized invoice directly onto my lap, right over my heavy blankets. The bold black numbers at the bottom of the final page seemed to mock me. The total outstanding balance was a staggering $450,000. I stared at the paper, my analytical brain automatically verifying the terrifying sum. Helicopter transport was $70,000. Surgical fees were well over $200,000. The intensive care unit and this luxurious room made up the rest. "Do not worry," I whispered, pushing the invoice away. "I can easily cover the balance. Just bring me my phone so I can authorize a direct wire transfer today." Rebecca did not look convinced, but she reached into her tailored blazer and produced my cracked smartphone. It had been charging at the nurse's station. I took it with my good hand, my fingers trembling slightly as the screen flickered to life. I ignored the barrage of unread emails from my accounting firm and the complete absence of text messages from my mother or sister. My only focus was opening my secure banking application. I had over $600,000 sitting in liquid assets across 3 accounts, not including my investment portfolios. Paying this absurd hospital bill would hurt, but it would not ruin me. I typed in my complex password and waited for the familiar dashboard to load. Instead, the screen flashed a bright red warning symbol. Access denied. Account frozen due to authorized administrative hold. Please contact your dedicated wealth manager. My stomach dropped. I tried logging in again, assuming it was a security precaution triggered by my lack of activity over the past 2 weeks. The same red error message glared back at me. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I tapped the screen and dialed the emergency customer service line for premium account holders. The phone rang twice before a polite representative named David answered. "David, this is Audrey," I said, fighting the panic in my chest. "I am trying to initiate a wire transfer, but my application says my accounts are frozen. There must be some kind of automated security mistake. Can you lift the restriction immediately?" There was a long pause followed by rapid typing. "Ms. Audrey, I am so relieved to hear your voice," David finally said, sounding genuinely surprised. "However, there is no security mistake on our end. Your accounts were legally frozen 12 days ago, under the direct orders of your authorized representative." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. What authorized representative? I demanded. I am a single woman with no dependents. No one else has access to my financial portfolio. According to the documents filed in person at our downtown branch, you are currently medically incapacitated. David explained, his tone shifting into careful corporate diplomacy. We received a signed medical and financial power of attorney. The mandate explicitly transferred temporary executive control of all your personal and corporate assets to your brother-in-law Jamal. He presented sworn affidavits stating you were in a coma. Under his authority, your accounts were locked to prevent unauthorized withdrawals while he restructures your assets to cover your long-term care. The air vanished from the room. The sterile walls seemed to close in on me. Jamal, my smooth-talking, incredibly ambitious brother-in-law who was always drowning in debt from his failed real estate ventures. He had marched into my bank while I was fighting for my life on a ventilator and legally hijacked my entire net worth. "David, that document is a forgery." I rasped, my voice rising in desperation. "I never signed a power of attorney giving Jamal control over anything. You need to freeze his access and restore mine right now. I am awake, and I am telling you this is massive financial fraud." "I am incredibly sorry, Ms. Audrey, but my hands are completely tied," David replied, sounding genuinely sympathetic but immovable. The paperwork was notarized and legally binding. "Because Jamal is your appointed guardian, we cannot reverse the freeze without a formal court order or his direct authorization. I strongly advise you to contact him or retain legal counsel. If there is nothing else I can help you with today, I have to disconnect the call." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my mind racing through the horrific implications. Jamal had not just stolen my money, he had stripped me of my autonomy. He knew I was the only person in the family who could see through his charismatic lies and spot a scam. By declaring me medically incompetent, he had legally silenced me and taken my resources for his own gain. "Well, Ms. Audrey," Rebecca said, her sharp voice breaking through my shock. Her foot tapped impatiently against the linoleum floor. "Has the wire transfer been authorized?" I looked up at the hospital administrator, feeling entirely helpless for the very first time in my professional life. "I cannot pay it right now," I whispered. "My accounts have been compromised." Rebecca sighed, closing her manila folder with a loud, definitive snap. "That is highly unfortunate," she said, her tone turning instantly frosty. "Because this is a premium VIP recovery suite, we require payment up front. If you cannot produce the funds within the next hour, I will be forced to begin the transfer protocols. We will move you to the county public hospital ward today." The county public hospital ward? Those words hung in the sterile air like a death sentence. As a forensic accountant who had audited municipal budgets, I knew exactly what the county hospital looked like from the inside. It was severely understaffed, chronically underfunded, and overflowing with desperate patients lying on stretchers in the dimly lit hallways. My fragile body was currently held together by surgical steel plates and fresh internal stitches. A sudden transfer to a massive facility with a widely known rate of post-operative infections would not just be extremely uncomfortable, it would be practically lethal for my current condition. Please listen to me, Rebecca. I begged, my voice cracking as I fought desperately to keep composure. You simply cannot move me right now. My immune system is entirely compromised from the trauma. I just need a few short hours to contact a corporate lawyer. I can get an emergency court injunction to reverse the fraudulent freeze on my assets. I have the money. Rebecca simply shook her head, her expression completely devoid of human sympathy. Hospital policy is strictly black and white, Ms. Audrey. Without a valid method of payment currently on file, we cannot legally justify keeping you in a premium VIP recovery suite. The county facility is perfectly equipped to handle your basic recovery needs. She did not wait for another argument. She tapped a rapid sequence on her digital tablet, and within 2 short minutes, a pair of burly hospital orderlies walked into my room, pushing a standard transport gurney. Panic gripped my chest tightly, restricting my airways. "No, wait," I protested weakly, as one of the men reached out to disconnect my specialized intravenous pain medication. "You are making a massive, terrible mistake. We are just doing our jobs, Ma," the first orderly said, his voice entirely detached from my physical suffering. "We have to prep you for the immediate ambulance transfer." Every slight movement sent agonizing shockwaves through my shattered legs. The sheer physical pain of them shifting my heavy plaster casts brought hot tears of pure frustration to my eyes. I was a senior executive. I had spent a decade building an impenetrable wall of financial security around myself, precisely so I would never be helpless. Yet here I was, being casually discarded like garbage because my manipulative brother-in-law had exploited a legal loophole while I was fighting for my life in a coma. They unhooked my heart monitor, silencing the rhythmic beeping that had been my only companion since waking up. The luxurious room suddenly felt incredibly cold. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying frantically to think of anyone I could call for help. I could not call my mother. She had already proven she would rather see me die than interrupt her holiday party. I could not call my firm because it was a Saturday, and the legal department was completely closed until Monday morning. I was completely trapped. "Hold on, stop what you are doing right now." The sudden shout came loudly from the doorway. My eyes snapped open. A young administrative clerk wearing a slightly rumpled shirt and a blue lanyard was standing in the entrance, completely out of breath. He was clutching a thick stack of printed financial receipts and looked like he had just sprinted up 5 flights of stairs to reach my floor. "What is the exact meaning of this interruption?" Rebecca demanded, her voice sharp with deep annoyance. "I am in the middle of a mandatory patient transfer. You are disrupting the workflow." The clerk hurried over to her, ignoring her reprimand entirely. He shoved the heavy stack of papers directly into her hands. "You have to cancel the transfer immediately," he panted, trying to catch his breath. "The billing department just received an incoming wire transfer from a secure international banking portal." Rebecca scoffed loudly, glancing down at the printed papers with obvious disdain. "A wire transfer takes days to clear the banking system. We do not accept pending transactions for VIP suites." "It is not pending," the clerk insisted, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. "It cleared exactly 3 minutes ago. The funds are already sitting securely in the hospital escrow account. The entire medical balance has been completely zeroed out." Rebecca stopped breathing for a second. She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and stared intently at the top receipt. Her cold, professional demeanor instantly shattered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. "This cannot be right," she muttered, flipping through the remaining pages. The balance was huge. "Who paid this?" "That is the strange part," the clerk replied, lowering his voice to a whisper. "It did not come from an individual. The money came from a completely anonymous corporation, and they left no contact name anywhere inside." "An anonymous corporation," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "That makes absolutely no sense. I do not have any corporate benefactors who would randomly drop $500,000 to save my life." The young clerk shrugged nervously, adjusting his blue lanyard. "I only know what the billing portal shows," he explained. "But the courier who delivered the initial wire transfer confirmation also dropped off a package specifically for you. He said it was urgent and gave strict instructions that it be handed directly to the patient. He pulled a small black velvet box from his jacket. It was sleek and unmarked, resembling a jewelry case, but slightly larger. He gently placed it on my lap, next to the zeroed-out bills. A crisp white card was tucked under the ribbon. I stared at the box, dread and curiosity washing over me. With trembling fingers, I pulled the card free and flipped it over. The handwriting was sharp and angular, written in black ink. It read, "Do not open until you get home." "Who dropped this off?" I asked the clerk, my heart hammering. "Did you see his face?" "I did not get a good look at him," the clerk admitted. He wore a heavy black leather coat and kept his collar pulled up. He handed over the receipt, gave me the box, and walked out before security could ask him to sign the log. A sudden chill raced down my spine. A heavy black leather coat. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I vividly remembered the terrifying moments outside the operating room before the anesthesia took hold. I remembered the stranger stepping out of the shadows, the smell of pine, and his deep voice commanding me to stay alive. "They are not worth dying for," he whispered. He was real. The man in the black coat was not a hallucination conjured by my dying brain. He was real, and he had just bought my freedom from the hospital ward. Rebecca cleared her throat, uncomfortable with this turn of events. "Well," she said, her tone shifting from frosty to highly accommodating. "Since your account is settled, there is no need for the county transfer. We can keep you in the VIP suite for a week of observation and physical therapy." "Cancel the observation," I said firmly, grabbing the black velvet box and clutching it to my chest. "I am discharging myself immediately, Ms. Audrey." "That is incredibly dangerous," the nurse protested, stepping forward with genuine alarm in her eyes. "You just woke up from a 2-week coma. You have massive surgical incisions and 2 shattered legs. Leaving against medical advice could be fatal. Staying in this bed while my brother-in-law steals my life is what will be fatal," I replied coldly. "Bring me the discharge papers right now. I need a wheelchair and whatever clothes you salvaged from the crash." It took 45 excruciating minutes of arguing with the surgeon before they allowed me to sign the waivers releasing the hospital from liability. Every movement was pure agony. The nurses helped me into oversized hospital scrubs because my winter clothes had been cut to shreds. They loaded me into a wheelchair, elevating my heavy plaster casts on padded leg rests. My left arm remained firmly strapped to my chest in its brace. The hospital doors slid open, hitting me with a blast of freezing Chicago wind. The winter storm had passed, but the city was buried under feet of packed snow. I used my good hand to navigate my phone, requesting an Uber downtown. The driver arrived in a black sedan, his eyes widening in shock, as the orderlies carefully lifted me into the back seat and folded up the wheelchair. "Take me to the Gold Coast," I told the driver, giving him the address of my luxury downtown penthouse. The ride was a blur of gray skies and snow-covered skyscrapers. Every pothole sent fresh waves of burning pain radiating from my surgical plates, but I welcomed the pain. It kept me sharp. It fueled my intense rage. Jamal thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought he could exploit my tragedy to fund his pathetic real estate scams, leaving me helpless and destitute. He vastly underestimated my resilience. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of my elegant high-rise. The towering glass facade gleamed in the afternoon light. This penthouse was my sanctuary, purchased with years of grueling audits and sleepless nights. It belonged to me. I thanked the driver and awkwardly maneuvered myself into the wheelchair, rolling onto the cleared sidewalk. I gripped the mysterious black velvet box tightly in my lap, ready to reclaim my home and destroy the man who tried to steal it. The freezing Chicago wind whipped through my thin hospital scrubs as I rolled my wheelchair toward the towering glass doors of my building. Every push of the wheels sent a fresh jolt of agony radiating up my shattered legs, but the searing pain only sharpened my absolute fury. I gripped the mysterious black velvet box tightly in my lap, feeling its weight like a promise. This luxury high-rise was my fortress. I had spent countless late nights analyzing fraudulent corporate ledgers to afford the multi-million-dollar mortgage on my penthouse. No parasitic brother-in-law was going to steal it from me while I was fighting for my life. The automatic sliding doors parted, welcoming me into the warm, familiar expanse of the grand marble lobby. The signature scent of fresh lilies and polished stone instantly filled my lungs. For a fleeting second, I felt a wave of relief. I was home. I navigated my wheelchair past the cascading water feature, heading for the private elevator bank reserved strictly for the penthouse residents. Miss Audrey. The sharp, panicked voice echoed across the empty lobby. I stopped pushing the wheels and turned my head slowly. Standing behind the mahogany concierge desk was Security Officer Greg. I had known Greg for 5 years. I always gave him generous holiday bonuses and asked about his young daughters. Usually his face would light up with a warm smile when I walked through the doors. Today, however, he looked absolutely terrified. He practically sprinted out from behind the desk, positioning his large frame directly between my wheelchair and the private elevators. "Greg, it is incredibly good to see you," I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm despite the pain in my chest. "As you can clearly see, I have had a terrible accident. Please use your master keycard to call the penthouse elevator for me. My left arm is strapped down and I cannot reach the panel." Greg did not reach for his keycard. Instead, he took a step backward, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. He looked at my heavy plaster casts and the bruised, battered skin on my face. His eyes filled with genuine pity, mixed with profound dread. "Miss Audrey, I am so incredibly sorry," he stammered, refusing to meet my eyes. "We all thought you were not going to make it, but I absolutely cannot let you go up there." I narrowed my eyes, my forensic accountant brain immediately shifting into high gear. "What exactly do you mean you cannot let me go up? I own the entire top floor of this building. I am the sole name on the property deed." Greg swallowed hard, nervously adjusting the collar of his uniform. "It is Mr. Jamal," he explained, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Your brother-in-law came into the management office last week with a team of lawyers. He presented a notarized medical power of attorney and sworn affidavits from the hospital stating you were permanently incapacitated. He legally established himself as the executor of your estate and the temporary property manager of the penthouse." My grip on the wheelchair handles tightened until my knuckles turned white. Jamal had moved astonishingly fast. He had not just frozen my bank accounts, he had orchestrated a complete hostile takeover of my physical life. "Jamal is committing massive financial fraud," I stated coldly, staring directly into the security guard's eyes. "I'm sitting right in front of you, entirely conscious and legally competent. Whatever fraudulent documents he gave the building manager are completely void. Step aside, Greg." "I cannot do that," Greg pleaded, looking around the lobby as if expecting Jamal to suddenly appear. "He gave us explicit written orders not to allow you onto the premises if you showed up. He claimed you were suffering from severe brain damage and might pose a danger to yourself and others. He even had the maintenance crew change all the biometric locks on the penthouse doors last Wednesday. Your fingerprints and access codes have been completely wiped from the building security system." The sheer audacity of his lies stole the breath right out of my lungs. Severe brain damage, a danger to myself. Jamal had crafted a narrative to ensure that if I woke up from the coma, nobody would believe a single word I said. He had locked me out of my own home, erased my digital footprint from the security network, and turned the staff I paid into his personal gatekeepers. "Miss Audrey," Greg continued desperately, "please do not make this difficult. If I let you up that elevator, I will lose my job immediately. Management has already validated his legal authority. You need to leave before I am forced to call the police for trespassing." "Call the police, Greg!" I challenged, my voice echoing coldly across the polished marble walls. "Please call them right now. In fact, call the building manager down here immediately. Let me explain exactly what is going to happen if you try to forcefully remove me from a property I legally own." Greg hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio on his belt. Before he could speak, the polished elevator doors chimed, and the general manager, Mr. Davis, stepped out into the lobby. He froze the moment he saw me sitting in the wheelchair. "Mr. Davis," I snapped before he could offer any fake pleasantries. "Jamal presented you with a medical power of attorney, not a deed of transfer, By locking me out of my own home while I am sitting right in front of you, completely lucid, you are actively participating in the illegal seizure of assets. As a senior forensic accountant, I know exactly how to file an emergency federal injunction. If you do not let me up to my apartment in the next 60 seconds, I will personally sue this management company for gross negligence, fraud, and breach of contract. I will drag this luxury building into a massive public scandal that will completely bankrupt your operating budget. Mr. Davis turned a sickly shade of gray. He was a corporate coward who prioritized avoiding lawsuits above all else. He looked nervously between my heavily casted legs and the intense burning fury in my eyes. He realized instantly that Jamal had lied to him about my mental state. I was not a brain-damaged victim. I was an incredibly angry executive ready to burn his career to the ground. "Give her the master access card," Mr. Davis instructed Greg, his voice shaking slightly. "We cannot legally restrict the primary deed holder from the premises if she is physically present." Greg quickly handed over a sleek black keycard. I snatched it with my good hand, refusing to break eye contact. "Now push me to the elevator," I commanded the manager. "You are going to escort me upstairs personally so you can witness exactly what kind of criminal activity you just enabled." Mr. Davis nodded weakly and stepped behind my wheelchair. He pushed me toward the private elevator bank and swiped the MasterCard. The heavy metal doors slid open with a soft chime. The ride up to the top floor felt agonizingly slow. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every second that ticked by on the digital floor display fueled the raging fire inside me. I clutched the mysterious black velvet box tightly in my lap, ignoring the sharp pain radiating from my shattered bones. When the elevator reached the penthouse level, the doors did not just open into a hallway. They opened directly into the expansive foyer of my apartment. The moment the metal panels parted, a massive wave of sound washed over me. Loud, rhythmic hip-hop music vibrated through the hardwood floors. The rich smell of expensive catered food and spilled alcohol assaulted my senses. The space was completely packed with people I did not even know. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne flutes. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freezing Chicago skyline reflected a sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. They were throwing a massive, lavish party inside the home I had bled to build. My eyes darted across the crowded living room, desperately searching for the architects of this nightmare. It did not take long to find them. Standing near the expensive marble kitchen island was my sister Madison. She was wearing my favorite custom silk dress, holding a crystal wine glass, and laughing loudly as she played the role of the perfect, gracious hostess. A few feet away, my mother Beverly was busy showing off the expensive modern art pieces I had curated, acting as if she had paid for them herself. And then I finally saw Jamal. My brother-in-law was standing by the fireplace wearing a sharp-tailored suit, looking like a billionaire mogul. He was aggressively pitching his new real estate development project to a small group of wealthy investors, using my multi-million-dollar penthouse as proof of his supposed success. He had literally stolen my life to build his fraudulent empire. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply sat in my wheelchair, staring at the disgusting display of pure greed happening in my living room. Mr. Davis stood frozen behind me, completely horrified by the chaotic scene he had unknowingly permitted. Someone near the entrance finally noticed me. A woman gasped, dropping her drink. The loud music suddenly cut off. The entire room went dead silent. I watched them carefully. The heavy silence in the room stretched out, suffocating the festive atmosphere. The wealthy investors Jamal had been sweet-talking slowly backed away, their eyes darting between my bruised face, my wheelchair, and the host of the party. Jamal froze mid-sentence, his charismatic smile slipping for a fraction of a second before he rapidly reconstructed his flawless facade. He handed his crystal glass to a passing waiter and casually adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. He did not look like a man who had just been caught stealing a multi-million-dollar property. He looked entirely in control. "Well, look at this absolute miracle," Jamal announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the silent room. He walked toward me with slow, measured steps, spreading his arms wide as if preparing for a warm family embrace. The doctors told us to prepare for the absolute worst. They said you might never wake up from that coma, Audrey. Yet here you are crashing our little gathering. Do not take another step toward me. I warned, my voice dangerously low, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. And do not dare pretend you are happy to see me breathing. Jamal stopped a few feet from my wheelchair. The fake smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of cold, calculated arrogance. He glanced back at Madison, who was staring at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep irritation, as if my survival was nothing more than a massive inconvenience to her evening. My mother simply crossed her arms, refusing to meet my eyes. Jamal turned back to me, leaning casually against the edge of my marble kitchen island. You always did have a flair for unnecessary drama. He sighed, shaking his head. I suppose the hospital discharged you early because you threw one of your classic tantrums. But you really should not have come here, Audrey. This environment is too stressful for your fragile recovery. This environment is my home, I fired back, gripping the armrests of my wheelchair. You illegally locked me out of my own bank accounts, Jamal. You bypassed my biometric security and changed the locks on my front door. You are currently hosting a corporate networking event inside a property that belongs entirely to me. I want everyone out of this penthouse right now. A few of the guests murmured anxiously, picking up their coats and edging toward the foyer. Jamal held up a hand, signaling them to stay. He did not even flinch at my accusations. Instead, he calmly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legally bound document. He tossed it onto the marble counter with a loud, dismissive smack. You are not in a clear state of mind, Audrey, he stated smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. That document right there is a fully executed medical and financial power of attorney. It gives me complete executive authority over your estate, your bank accounts, and this penthouse. The courts recognize that you were entirely incapacitated. I am simply stepping up to manage your assets since you obviously cannot do it yourself. You forged my signature while I was unconscious, I said, glaring at the paperwork. That is federal fraud. It is legally binding, Jamal countered, taking a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, mocking whisper meant only for me. The notary signed off on it. The hospital administration accepted it. Your own mother testified that you would want me to handle the family finances. You see, Audrey, the doctors told me your brain swelled from the impact. They practically guaranteed you would be a vegetable for the rest of your pathetic life. It would have been a massive tragedy to let a $3 million piece of prime real estate sit empty and useless. You used my home as collateral. I realized the pieces of his fraudulent scheme snapping into perfect clarity. I leveraged an unused asset to secure funding for my new commercial development project. Jamal corrected, a smug grin spreading across his face. The bank loved the equity in this penthouse. They handed me a massive line of credit based on your property. This party tonight is to celebrate the launch of my new firm. The investors are already lined up. Your tragic little accident provided the exact seed money I needed to finally build my empire. You are going to prison, I whispered, staring into his cold, greedy eyes. Jamal laughed softly, shaking his head with absolute pity. No, Audrey. I am going to be a billionaire, and you are going to a public nursing facility because you do not have a single dollar left to your name, completely broken and entirely forgotten by your own family. The sheer audacity of Jamal's statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Before I could formulate a response to his blatant extortion, Madison stepped out from behind the marble island. She carefully set her crystal wine glass down, her face twisting into a mask of exaggerated theatrical concern. She crossed the room, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor I had paid for, and stopped next to her husband. Audrey, please stop doing this! Madison pleaded, her voice trembling with perfectly practiced fake emotion. She looked around at the remaining party guests, ensuring she had their full attention. You have always been so incredibly selfish, but this is a new low even for you. Jamal and I have been at the hospital every single day, praying for a miracle. We took on the massive, crushing burden of your estate because the doctors said your brain was irreparably damaged. We are trying to build a legacy, a future for our family, and you are trying to tear it down out of pure jealousy. Jealousy. I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth. You are wearing my clothes, drinking my wine, and stealing my home. There is absolutely nothing about you to be jealous of, Madison. Do not speak to your sister that way. My mother, Beverly snapped, finally breaking her silence. She marched over, her face flushed with anger, her heavy gold jewelry clinking loudly. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. Madison is entirely right. You have spent your entire adult life hoarding your money, sitting alone in this giant empty apartment while your sister and Jamal are actually trying to create something meaningful. They are building a real family. They are creating generational wealth. With my money, I reminded her coldly, I paid for Madison to go to college. I paid off your credit card debt. Mother, I bought the very necklace you are wearing right now, and you never let us forget it. Beverly shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the penthouse. You always used your paycheck to control us. You think because you audit a few corporate bank accounts you are better than everyone else. Jamal actually has vision, he has ambition, he has a mountain of debt and a history of failed scams. I shot back, gripping the wheels of my chair. He is using my property to secure a fraudulent loan, and you are enabling him. He is family, Beverly yelled, her face contorted with rage. Something you clearly know absolutely nothing about. You only care about spreadsheets and bank balances. When the hospital called and said you were in a coma, do you know what Jamal did? He stepped up. He took charge to protect this family from financial ruin. And the moment you wake up, you drag yourself over here just to publicly humiliate him in front of his investors. You are deeply unhinged, Audrey. The doctors were right. The crash completely ruined your mind. The psychological manipulation was staggering. They were actively stealing my life, yet they had seamlessly cast themselves as the noble victims and painted me as the greedy, deranged villain. I looked at the three of them standing united against me, my own mother, my sister, and the man orchestrating my financial ruin. They felt utterly invincible, protected by a forged piece of paper and their own twisted delusions. They expected me to break down, to start screaming wildly, which would effortlessly confirm their cruel narrative that I was medically incompetent and dangerously unstable. I want you out of this building immediately, Madison demanded, her fake tears vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, hard glare. If you do not leave right now, Jamal is going to call the police and have you forcibly removed for trespassing. You are medically incompetent, Audrey. The law is entirely on our side. I looked at the forged power of attorney, resting securely on the marble counter. Fighting them right now, screaming violently, until my healing lungs finally gave out, would only validate their elaborate lie. I was a forensic accountant. I possessed a mind trained exclusively to dismantle complex financial crimes. Piece by precise piece, I knew perfectly well that screaming never won a single legal case in any jurisdiction. Hard, indisputable evidence did, and I was holding a black velvet box filled with secrets, resting quietly on my lap. Fine, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper that made the room pause. I will leave, but I am taking my personal safe from the master bedroom closet before I go. It contains my passport and my original birth certificate. Unless you plan to steal my fundamental identity as well. Jamal. Go ahead, Jamal stated dismissively. Take your safe and never come back here again. I turned my wheelchair around without saying another word to any of them. The party guests parted like the Red Sea as I rolled toward the master bedroom. My forensic accountant training kicked in, silencing the roaring emotional hurricane inside my chest. In my line of work, you do not win by throwing tantrums. You win by meticulously gathering evidence and striking only when your opponent is completely blind to the trap. I pushed the heavy oak door of my bedroom open. The space had been entirely redecorated. My minimalist furniture was gone, replaced by Madison's loud, tacky taste. I ignored the visual violation and wheeled myself directly to the walk-in closet. Hidden behind a false baseboard was a compartment they had completely failed to discover. I leaned down, ignoring the sharp burning agony in my ribs, and pulled away the wooden panel. My small, portable fireproof safe was still resting exactly where I had hidden it. I grabbed the heavy metal handle with my good right hand and dragged it onto my lap, resting it right next to the black velvet box. I rolled back through the penthouse. The loud hip-hop music had resumed, but the atmosphere remained thick with awkward tension. Jamal watched me from the kitchen island, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug smile of total victory playing on his lips. Beverly and Madison did not even bother to look in my direction. They were already moving on, casually dismissing my existence as they returned to their stolen luxury. I did not look back as the elevator doors closed, sealing them inside my home. The ride down to the lobby was agonizingly quiet. When the doors opened, the building manager, Mr. Davis, quickly turned his head, staring intently at a blank wall to avoid making eye contact with me. Greg, the security guard, looked down at his shoes. Neither of them offered to help me open the heavy glass doors. I pushed myself out into the freezing Chicago evening alone. The winter storm had passed, but the temperature was dropping rapidly as the sun began to set over the icy city skyline. The biting wind cut straight through my thin hospital scrubs, chilling my battered body to the bone. I navigated the heavy wheelchair down the salted sidewalk until I reached a small, snow-covered park situated directly across the street from my building. I pushed myself off the main path and parked next to a freezing iron bench under a bare oak tree. The city lights began to flicker on around me, casting long, lonely shadows across the snow. My teeth began to chatter violently. I was physically exhausted, effectively homeless, and locked out of my entire financial life. Jamal had executed a flawless, ruthless takeover, but he had made one catastrophic mistake. He assumed I was just a helpless victim. I placed the heavy metal safe onto the icy park bench beside me. Then, with trembling fingers, I reached for the small black velvet box still resting on my lap. The mysterious stranger at the hospital had paid my massive medical debt and left me this exact package with strict instructions not to open it until I was home. Even though I was sitting in the freezing cold outside of my building, I knew this was the right moment. I pulled the satin ribbon and lifted the velvet lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark silk, were two items. The first was a small, bright red USB drive. The second was a folded piece of glossy photographic paper. I picked up the photograph first. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded the thick paper. It was a high-resolution, printed still from a vehicle dash cam. The timestamp in the bottom corner displayed Christmas Eve, marking the exact minute my life had been violently ripped apart. The image showed the desolate, icy highway. In the center of the frame was my silver SUV, completely crushed against the concrete barrier. And right behind it, captured in the very act of violently ramming my rear bumper, was the massive black truck. I stared at the photograph, my forensic mind instantly analyzing every single pixel. The picture was incredibly clear. I could easily read the bright yellow numbers on the commercial license plate. Above the license plate, bolted to the tailgate, was a custom metal logo featuring a stylized geometric building. It was the exact corporate logo for Jamal's primary construction company, the shell corporation he used to shuffle dirty money between his failed real estate ventures. Jamal had not opportunistically used an accident to steal my apartment. He orchestrated the crash. This was a calculated, cold-blooded attempted murder. My family was upstairs celebrating the man who tried to kill me. The freezing wind howling through the barren park trees finally forced me to move. I carefully tucked the printed photograph back into the black velvet box and placed it inside my heavy metal safe. With agonizing effort, I pushed my wheelchair back onto the salted sidewalk. I needed shelter, but I could not go to a luxury hotel where Jamal might track my credit cards. I flagged down a passing yellow taxi. The quiet older driver helped me load my wheelchair and safe into the trunk. I handed him a crisp $100 bill from the emergency cash stash inside my coat pocket. "Take me to the south side," I instructed him, my voice completely steady despite the searing pain. "Take me somewhere cheap and off the grid." The ride took 45 minutes, leaving the glittering skyline of Chicago far behind. We pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a rundown roadside motel. The neon sign buzzed loudly above the office, flashing a dull red vacancy warning. I paid for 3 nights using only cash under a fake name. The motel manager barely looked up from his television as he slid a brass key across the scratched counter. The room smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The floral bedspread was faded and the thin curtains barely blocked the harsh glare of the streetlights. It was a staggering contrast to the pristine marble floors of my stolen penthouse. But right now, this dingy space was exactly what I needed. It was a secure bunker where I could finally begin my counterattack. I locked the deadbolt and dragged my wheelchair to the small, rickety desk pressed against the far wall. My entire body throbbed with a relentless, deep bone ache. I swallowed 2 emergency pain pills, forcing myself to focus entirely on the task at hand. I unlocked my fireproof safe, pulling out my corporate laptop. As a senior forensic accountant, my laptop was essentially a digital weapon. It possessed encrypted hard drives and direct access to federal financial databases that could untangle the most sophisticated money laundering schemes in the world. I plugged the heavy power cord into the loose wall outlet and pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life, casting a harsh blue light across the dark room. I reached into the safe again and retrieved the small red USB drive. The printed photograph was damning evidence, but in court a single still image could be argued by expensive defense attorneys as an unfortunate coincidence. A video, however, was an entirely different beast. I inserted the drive into the side port of my laptop. The system instantly recognized the external device. A file folder popped up on my desktop labeled simply with the date of the crash. I opened the folder, revealing a high-definition video file. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what I was about to witness. I double-clicked the icon, and the video player opened, filling my screen. The footage began in total silence. It was recorded from the dashboard camera of a vehicle traveling slightly behind the massive black truck. The digital timestamp in the lower corner ticked away the seconds of Christmas Eve. The snowy highway was dark and entirely deserted. Then my silver SUV appeared in the distance, driving at a safe speed through the raging blizzard. The black truck with Jamal's construction company logo bolted clearly to the tailgate was cruising directly behind me. I watched the screen intensely, leaning closer to the monitor. For a few minutes, the truck maintained a normal following distance. Then the brake lights of my SUV flashed briefly as I tried to signal the driver to back off. Instead of slowing down, the massive truck suddenly accelerated. The engine exhaust plumed heavily into the freezing air as it surged forward with terrifying speed. There was no attempt to swerve. There was no patch of black ice that caused a loss of control. The driver deliberately steered the heavy metal grille of the truck directly into my rear bumper. The impact on the video was horrific. I watched my own vehicle lift violently off the ground, spinning completely out of control before rolling over and smashing into the concrete barrier. The black truck did not stop or slow down to check the wreckage. It sped away into the dark, stormy night, leaving me to bleed out alone in the freezing snow. I paused the video right at the moment of impact. The brake lights of the truck never illuminated. Jamal had fully intended to crush my car and end my life. It was a premeditated assassination executed simply to steal my penthouse. He tried to murder me. I closed the laptop. The time for absolute destruction had officially begun. The silence of the dingy motel room was suddenly shattered by a sharp electronic ringing. I jumped, slightly wincing as a fresh wave of pain shot through my fractured ribs. The sound was not coming from my own cracked smartphone resting on the desk. The ringing was muffled, echoing from inside the heavy metal safe. I reached inside and pulled out the empty black velvet box. Beneath the dark silk lining where the photograph and USB drive had been resting, a small hidden compartment vibrated intensely. I peeled back the fabric and found a sleek black burner phone. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating an unknown caller ID in the dim room. My heart hammered against my chest. Only one person could possibly be calling this specific device. The man in the black leather coat who had paid my massive hospital bill and delivered the damning evidence of my attempted murder. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling hand, and pressed the green answer button. I lifted the phone to my ear but did not say a word. For a long moment, the only sound on the line was the faint static of a secure connection. Then a deep, resonant voice broke the tension. "I told you they were not worth dying for, Audrey." The man said, his tone calm and entirely in control. "I am glad to see you decided to take my advice and check yourself out of that hospital." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cold and demanding, despite my fragile physical state. "Why did you pay $500,000 to save my life? And how exactly did you get that dashcam footage of my brother-in-law trying to kill me?" "My name is Thomas," he replied smoothly. "I run a private venture capital firm based in New York. I deal in high-risk, high-reward investments, and I absolutely despise being lied to. Your brother-in-law Jamal has been aggressively pitching my firm for the past 6 months. He wants me to inject $50 million in seed capital into his new commercial real estate development project. He presented a flawless portfolio featuring your luxury penthouse as his primary secured collateral. He painted a beautiful picture of a thriving family business built on trust and mutual success. It sounded entirely too perfect, so I hired an elite team of private investigators to quietly audit his daily activities. I gripped the edge of the cheap motel desk, my forensic mind racing to connect the rapidly forming pieces. "You were tracking him," I realized aloud. "You were watching Jamal on Christmas Eve." "Not just Jamal," Thomas corrected, his voice hardening with sharp professional edge. "My investigators were tracking his entire network, including the shell company that owns that black truck. I happened to be in Chicago finalizing another deal when my security team alerted me to some highly suspicious movement. They were following the truck when it aggressively tailed your silver SUV onto the icy highway. I was in a town car about a mile behind them. My team caught the entire premeditated collision on their high-definition dashcam. We pulled you from the wreckage before the paramedics even arrived. I stood outside the trauma bay and listened to your mother casually dismiss your life over the phone. I realized right then that Jamal was not just a desperate businessman stretching the truth on a loan application. He was a dangerous sociopath willing to slaughter his own family members to secure my $50 million investment. He thought he could bury you and steal your assets to pass my final financial background check. If you know he is a violent criminal and a fraud, why did you not just hand this video over to the police immediately?" I asked, my tone reflecting my deep suspicion. "Why give the evidence to me and pay my medical bills instead?" "Because sending Jamal to prison for vehicular assault is entirely too easy," Thomas answered, his voice dropping to a ruthless, calculating whisper. "If the police arrest him now, his lawyers will tie the case up in court for years, claiming it was a terrible accident caused by the winter storm. He might even negotiate a plea deal and keep the money he already stole from you. I do not just want to see his fraudulent business fail, Audrey. I want to see his entire corrupt empire completely dismantled from the inside out. I want him humiliated, bankrupt, and permanently destroyed. And based on the intense anger I heard in your voice when you spoke to the hospital administrator, I am guessing you want the exact same thing. To execute this plan properly, I need an insider. I need the very best forensic accountant currently working in Chicago." I leaned back in the creaky motel chair, the cheap plastic groaning under my weight. Thomas was proposing an alliance, and the sheer scale of his ambition was breathtaking. "I need an insider," he had said, "someone with the exact skill set to expose the rot hidden beneath Jamal's polished financial statements." He was right. I was a senior forensic accountant. I spent my days hunting down missing millions from massive corporations, analyzing complex offshore accounts, and building bulletproof federal cases against corrupt executives. If anyone could completely dismantle Jamal's fraudulent empire, it was me. But I was not about to blindly trust a ruthless New York venture capitalist I had never met, regardless of whether he had paid my hospital bills. "Why do you need me specifically, Thomas?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You have unlimited resources. You could easily hire an entire firm of forensic analysts to tear through his loan applications. You could destroy his funding in a week without my help. I could. Thomas admitted, his deep voice carrying a sharp edge of predatory confidence. But hiring an external firm takes time, and it raises massive red flags. The moment my auditors request deep access to Jamal's internal ledgers, he will panic. He will start shredding documents, moving the stolen assets, and burning his shell companies to the ground. He is a rat cornered in a maze of debt, Audrey. If he senses danger, he will disappear with the millions he already scammed from his previous investors, and worse, he will disappear with the equity he just stole from your penthouse. I need someone who can audit him from the inside quietly and legally. Someone who already has the authorized clearance to access his primary accounts. Someone he completely underestimates. You want me to use the forged power of attorney against him? I realized a cold smile forming on my bruised face. Exactly, Thomas replied, the satisfaction evident in his tone. Jamal legally designated himself as the executor of your estate, linking your primary banking profile to his corporate holding accounts to leverage the line of credit. In doing so, he unknowingly created a digital backdoor. Because your name is still technically tied to those foundational assets, your federal accounting credentials allow you to legally trace the origin of every single dollar he moves through that specific network. You can access the back end of his commercial ledger without triggering a single security alert. You can build the federal case against him while he is busy popping champagne and celebrating your supposed brain damage. It was a brilliant, terrifyingly effective strategy. Jamal's greatest weapon against me, the fraudulent document he used to steal my life, would become the very tool I used to completely annihilate him. I stared at the burner phone, my mind already calculating the immense effort this would require. It would be incredibly dangerous. If Jamal or his corrupt bankers noticed my digital footprint inside his accounts before I finished the investigation, he would not hesitate to silence me permanently. He had already tried to kill me once in a blizzard. Next time, he would ensure I did not survive. What is your exact proposal, Thomas? I asked, cutting straight to the absolute core of the negotiation. What are the terms of our arrangement? I will provide you with an encrypted server located completely off the grid, Thomas stated rapidly, clearly prepared for my direct approach. I will give you untraceable internet access, sophisticated financial mapping software, and a direct secure line to my personal legal team. My lawyers are former federal prosecutors. They are the best in the country. When you have successfully compiled enough hard evidence to prove he is running a massive Ponzi scheme, my team will hand-deliver the entire dossier directly to the highest levels of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. We will not just freeze his accounts. We will trigger a coordinated federal raid on his corporate office and his home. But I need you to commit completely, Audrey. This is not a petty family squabble anymore. This is a multi-million-dollar federal fraud investigation. If you agree to this, there is no stepping back. I did not need to think about it. The image of my mother screaming at me, defending the man who had ordered my murder, was burned permanently into my mind. They had chosen their side. They had chosen greed and manipulation over my life. Now they were going to face the absolute consequences of their betrayal. I accept your deal, Thomas, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Send me the server access codes immediately. I am going to rip his entire life apart dollar by dollar. Good, Thomas replied softly. Check your secure email in exactly 5 minutes. Welcome to the war, Audrey. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the freezing motel room, armed with a laptop and a singular, devastating purpose. Exactly 5 minutes later, my secure email inbox chimed with a new encrypted message. It contained complex proxy addresses and a single highly secure login portal. Thomas had delivered exactly as promised. The server connection was invisible, running through international relays to mask my location. I cracked my knuckles, ignoring the pain shooting up my damaged left arm, and typed in my federal accounting credentials. The heavy digital vault doors of Jamal's financial life swung wide open. Because he legally bound my name to his primary holding company, Using that forged document, my federal clearance bypassed every security firewall his corrupt bankers had installed. I was inside the mainframe. I opened my specialized forensic mapping software and began pulling the transaction histories for the past 3 years. At first glance, his corporate ledgers looked pristine. He had multiple limited liability companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, all showing steady incoming capital and legitimate construction expenses. It was the perfect illusion, designed specifically to fool bank auditors and wealthy investors like Thomas. But I was not a standard auditor. I was a predator, hunting for anomalies in a vast ocean of numbers. I started by isolating the massive line of credit he secured using my penthouse as collateral. $3 million had been deposited into his primary operating account, exactly 2 days after I fell into the coma. I highlighted the digital funds and initiated a deep trace command to follow where that money actually went. It did not go toward purchasing commercial real estate or buying construction materials for his supposed development project. Instead, the massive sum was immediately splintered into 50 smaller wire transfers. I tracked the first dozen transfers. They were routed directly into offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. This was money laundering. He was breaking the massive loan down into untraceable fragments to wash the funds clean. But I kept digging, pulling the ultimate destination data from the International Banking Registry. The washed money was quietly funneled back into the United States to pay off a mountain of aggressive high-interest debt held by private loan sharks and shadow lenders. Jamal was not building a real estate empire. He was desperately bailing water out of a sinking ship. I shifted my focus to his supposed construction expenses. His ledger showed millions of dollars paid out to various independent contractors and material suppliers over the past 12 months. I cross-referenced the employer identification numbers of those specific contractors with the federal tax database. My screen rapidly filled with bright red error codes. The contractors did not exist. They were phantom companies registered to empty postal boxes across the Midwest. Jamal was writing massive checks to himself using fake vendor invoices to completely drain the investment capital he received from previous victims. It was a classic Ponzi scheme executed with terrifying precision. He used the money from new investors to pay off the massive returns promised to older investors, all while skimming millions off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. The expensive tailored suits, the designer dresses. My sister wore the lavish holiday parties they were all paid for with stolen money. And when his original well of investors finally ran completely dry, he became incredibly desperate. He needed a massive injection of clean capital to keep the entire fraudulent pyramid from collapsing. He needed my penthouse and he needed Thomas to hand over $50 million. I sat back in my creaky motel chair, the harsh blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off my bruised face. I had him. The digital evidence downloading onto my secure server was absolute and completely irrefutable. I had documented 20 counts of federal wire fraud, 15 counts of corporate money laundering, and massive tax evasion. The sheer volume of his financial crimes carried a mandatory federal prison sentence of at least 30 years. I took a sip of lukewarm water from the plastic motel cup, feeling a cold, dark sense of absolute victory wash over my exhausted body. I had successfully dismantled his entire false reality in less than 4 hours. But as I prepared to package the final forensic dossier to send directly to Thomas, something strange caught my eye. It was a secondary ledger file buried deep inside a restricted folder labeled simply as family liabilities. I had ignored it, assuming it was just petty cash for Madison's shopping habits. My intuition flared, warning me to look closer. I clicked the hidden folder and began decrypting the attached banking documents. The files slowly loaded onto my screen, revealing a series of heavily notarized loan agreements. I leaned closer to the monitor, my blood running cold as I read the name under the primary guarantor section. It was not Jamal. It was my mother. I stared at the digital signature on the high-resolution PDF file, refusing to believe my own eyes for a brief moment. But there it was in perfectly notarized black and white. Beverly had legally bound herself to Jamal and his sinking financial ship. I opened the attached schedule of assets and my jaw tightened. She had not just co-signed a standard business loan, she had pledged her entire life savings as collateral. Every single dollar of my late father's corporate pension fund was listed. Her expansive 4-bedroom suburban home was fully mortgaged against Jamal's high-interest debt. She had literally handed him the keys to her entire existence to fund his fake real estate empire. I ran a rapid calculation through my forensic software projecting the inevitable outcome of these specific documents. The loans Jamal had secured using her assets were highly predatory. They were designed to swallow the guarantor completely if the primary borrower missed even a single payment. Jamal was already defaulting on his earlier shadow loans. That was exactly why he needed my penthouse and Thomas to provide a massive injection of new capital. He was using my stolen property to temporarily cover the massive holes in his ledger, shielding my mother from the immediate consequences of her own foolish generosity. If I completely destroyed Jamal's fraudulent network tonight, the federal government would freeze all of his accounts by tomorrow morning. The predatory shadow lenders would instantly call in the massive debts. By handing this digital dossier over to Thomas, I would not just be sending my brother-in-law to a federal penitentiary for massive corporate fraud and attempted murder. I would be initiating a catastrophic financial chain reaction that would completely wipe out my own mother. The banks would immediately seize her pension. The shadow lenders would aggressively foreclose on her beautiful suburban house. She would be completely bankrupt, destitute, and homeless before the end of the month. A normal daughter might have hesitated at this profound realization. A normal daughter might have felt a sudden crushing wave of crippling guilt, or a desperate urge to warn her mother before the federal hammer finally fell. But I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I sat in the freezing darkness of the cheap roadside motel room and remembered the exact tone of her voice, echoing through the emergency room speakerphone. I remembered the sound of clinking champagne glasses while I was bleeding out inside a crushed metal box. Call me if she dies. Those 5 words had permanently severed whatever biological loyalty I still owed her. She had willingly chosen to protect a manipulative criminal over her own flesh and blood, simply because he wore expensive tailored suits and promised her a life of endless luxury. She had proudly defended him in my penthouse just a few hours ago, calling me deranged and jealous while I sat in a wheelchair with shattered legs. She made her choice, and now she was going to face the absolute consequences of her blind greed. I did not hesitate for another second. I selected the folder containing my mother's signed guarantor agreements and dragged it directly into the encrypted dossier I was preparing for Thomas. Let the federal investigators see every single dirty detail. Let the prosecutors tear apart the entire family network. I meticulously organized the downloaded transaction logs, the offshore wire transfer receipts, and the fake contractor invoices into a highly structured legal presentation. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how to package the evidence so that no expensive defense attorney could ever unravel it. The case was completely bulletproof. I slowly typed a final decisive message directly to Thomas over the highly secure portal. The financial autopsy is now completely and entirely finished. I have documented massive federal wire fraud, a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, and undeniable tax evasion. The full dossier is attached. Send it to the SEC and the FBI immediately. Do not hold absolutely anything back from them. I confidently hit send and watched the progress bar fill across the bottom of the screen. The encrypted files vanished into the digital ether, speeding directly toward the ruthless New York venture capitalist. The massive and inescapable trap was finally officially set. Jamal and Madison were currently busy preparing for their lavish black tie gala, entirely unaware that their glamorous world was about to violently collapse around them. I closed the laptop screen, plunging the dingy motel room back into total silence. I leaned back in the creaky chair, finally allowing the physical exhaustion to wash over my battered body. I had miraculously survived the terrible crash, and I had successfully secured all the evidence. Now I just had to wait patiently for the final execution of my brilliant plan. I woke up the next morning to the harsh glare of winter sunlight streaming through the thin motel curtains. My entire body felt like it was encased in solid lead. The painkillers I had taken the night before had completely worn off, leaving my shattered legs throbbing with intense rhythmic agony. But the physical pain was entirely secondary to the sharp, cold clarity of my mind. The federal trap was already set in motion. Thomas and his elite legal team were currently handing my explosive financial dossier over to the authorities. However, federal raids required precise timing. If Jamal sensed even the slightest hint of danger, he would immediately attempt to flee the country with his offshore accounts. I needed to keep him perfectly comfortable. I needed to feed his massive ego until the very second the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. I reached across the small desk and grabbed my cracked personal smartphone. It was time to play my final role in their twisted family drama. I dialed her private cell number, fully preparing myself to stomach her absolute arrogance. I cleared my throat, taking a deep, ragged breath to artificially induce the sound of tears. I needed to sound completely broken, utterly defeated, and hopelessly desperate. The phone rang 3 times before she finally answered. "Hello," Madison answered, her voice dripping with extreme annoyance over the loud background noise of florists and caterers preparing for her massive evening gala. "What do you want, Audrey? I am incredibly busy right now." I let out a long, shuddering sob, forcing my voice to tremble uncontrollably. "Madison, please do not hang up," I begged, pitching my tone perfectly to mimic absolute despair. I spent the entire night sitting in a freezing public bus station. My legs are in agonizing pain. I have absolutely no money left, and the bank will not let me access a single dollar. I am entirely locked out. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the distinct, unmistakable sound of my sister laughing softly to herself. She was completely drunk on her own false victory. "I warned you not to come to the penthouse and embarrass us," Madison replied coldly. "Jamal was right. Your brain just cannot comprehend the new reality. You are completely powerless now. What did you expect me to do? Beg Jamal to let you sleep on our expensive new couch?" I squeezed my eyes shut, channeling my intense hatred into another pathetic sob. "I surrender, Madison," I cried out, making sure my voice cracked with authentic-sounding defeat. "I cannot fight you and Jamal anymore. The lawyers are too expensive and I cannot even afford to buy food right now. I just want this nightmare to end. I will officially sign the penthouse deed completely over to Jamal without any further legal resistance. I will drop everything." That immediately caught her attention. The background noise on her end suddenly quieted down as she stepped into a private room. "You will formally sign away the deed?" she asked, her tone shifting from dismissive to highly intrigued. "Yes," I replied desperately. "I will sign the primary transfer documents and legally validate his power of attorney. But you have to give me $10,000 in cash. I just need enough money to disappear, find a cheap apartment in another state, and pay for my basic medical supplies. $10,000 is absolutely nothing compared to a $3 million property. Please, Madison, just let me survive." She let out a loud, triumphant sigh, relishing every single second of my fabricated humiliation. $10,000 is a lot of money to waste on someone who treats their own family so terribly, she scolded me mockingly. "But Jamal is an incredibly generous man. He actually anticipated that you would eventually hit rock bottom and come crawling back for a handout. We will give you the cash, Audrey. But we are not bringing it to some dirty bus terminal." "Where do I have to go?" I asked meekly. "Tonight is our massive investment gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel Madison," explained her voice swelling with immense pride. "Bring yourself to the main ballroom entrance at exactly 8 this evening. Jamal will have his corporate attorneys waiting there with the final property transfer papers. You will sign the deed right there in the lobby, acknowledge your medical incompetence on paper, and then we will hand you a secure envelope with the cash. And Audrey, please try not to look like a complete beggar when you show up. We have very important billionaires attending this event. Do not embarrass us." I hung up the phone quickly. The intricate trap was officially set. They were expecting a completely broken victim. Tonight I would deliver an absolute nightmare. The Grand Plaza Hotel was the crown jewel of downtown Chicago, a towering monument of gilded architecture and excessive wealth. For Jamal, it was the perfect stage to finalize his ultimate scam. He had rented out the primary ballroom, an expense that undoubtedly drained the last remaining legitimate funds from his over-leveraged accounts. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over dozens of round tables, draped in heavy white silk. Massive arrangements of white orchids and imported roses sat as centerpieces, projecting an aura of absolute financial stability. Madison was in her element, directing an army of stressed catering staff and event planners with the haughty entitlement of a newly crowned queen. She wore a custom designer gown that cost more than most people earned in an entire year, a dress paid for entirely by the fraudulent line of credit secured against my stolen penthouse. At the far end of the lavish ballroom, a local financial news crew was actively setting up their heavy cameras and bright lighting equipment for an exclusive live broadcast. Jamal stood confidently under the harsh spotlights, looking every bit the billionaire developer he desperately pretended to be. His tailored suit was absolutely flawless, his charismatic smile expertly practiced. I watched the live high-definition feed on my encrypted laptop from the cold confines of my dingy motel room. The news anchor, a perfectly styled woman with a bright artificial smile, held up a microphone. "We are here with Jamal, the visionary chief executive behind the city's most anticipated commercial real estate development," she announced smoothly. "Jamal, tonight you are finalizing a $50 million investment partnership." What exactly drives this incredible ambition? Jamal lowered his head slightly, adopting an expression of deep, humble reflection. "Family is my absolute driving force," he replied, his deep voice resonating with sickeningly fake sincerity. "Building massive wealth is completely meaningless if you do not have a strong foundation of family values to support it. My beautiful wife Madison and I strongly believe in creating commercial spaces that bring communities together." The anchor nodded sympathetically, leaning in closer. "We understand your family has faced a terrible medical tragedy recently," she prompted gently. Jamal sighed heavily, delivering a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Yes, my sister-in-law Audrey suffered a catastrophic car accident a few weeks ago," he said softly, looking directly into the camera lens with fabricated sorrow. "She has unfortunately suffered severe cognitive decline and massive physical trauma. It has been a devastating financial and emotional burden on our family, but it only strengthened my resolve. I stepped in to legally manage her affairs because that is exactly what family does." Jamal continued smoothly, never breaking his earnest character. "We protect our own. We carry the heavy weight when they simply cannot. This entire ambitious project is dedicated to her tragic struggle. I actually utilized her vacant property to secure the initial seed funding, ensuring her personal legacy contributes directly to the bright future of this beautiful city." I stared at the laptop screen, feeling a cold, hollow laugh rise in my chest. The sheer audacity of his public performance was absolutely staggering. He was publicly branding his calculated attempted murder and massive financial theft as an act of noble familial charity. He was expertly laying the groundwork to ensure that when I finally succumbed to my injuries or vanished into extreme poverty, high society would view him as a grieving, heroic patriarch rather than a ruthless parasite. He genuinely believed he had won the war. He believed Thomas was arriving tonight to happily hand him a massive corporate check that would permanently wash his dirty ledger clean. He had absolutely no idea that the federal government was currently dissecting the encrypted dossier I had delivered. I closed the laptop and pushed my wheelchair away from the cheap motel desk. I had a few hours before my scheduled meeting in the Grand Hotel lobby. Madison had specifically told me not to look like a beggar, warning me not to embarrass them in front of their wealthy investors. I had every intention of honoring that specific request, but not in the way she foolishly anticipated. I opened my heavy metal safe one last time and pulled out a crisp, pressed black business suit. It was the exact same suit I wore when testifying as an expert witness in federal fraud cases. Getting dressed with shattered legs and a braced arm was an agonizing hour-long ordeal of sheer willpower. I carefully concealed my heavy plaster casts beneath wide leg trousers and draped the tailored blazer over my immobilized shoulder. I pulled my hair back into a severe professional knot. I did not look broken. I looked like a forensic accountant ready to execute a corporate death sentence. I smiled. I grabbed my encrypted laptop from the rickety motel desk and opened the lid one last time. The screen illuminated my face, casting a harsh blue glow across the cramped room. The forensic dossier was perfectly organized, sitting securely on the desktop. It contained every single piece of damning evidence I had meticulously gathered against Jamal. The offshore wire transfers, the fake contractor invoices, the predatory shadow loans, and the undeniable proof of his massive Ponzi scheme were all neatly compiled into federal complaint forms. I opened the secure communication portal Thomas had provided. His elite legal team was standing by in New York, waiting for my final signal. I attached the massive encrypted file to the message window. The recipient list included the highest enforcement divisions of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Chicago field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I did not feel a single ounce of hesitation. I rested my finger on the trackpad, took a deep, steadying breath, and pressed send. The progress bar flashed across the screen for 5 agonizing seconds before the confirmation notification popped up. The digital payload was successfully delivered. There was no turning back now. Within seconds, the ruthless machinery of the United States federal government snapped into immediate action. Thomas had promised his lawyers would fast-track the review process, but even I was astonished by the sheer speed of the execution. I watched the live terminal window on my server connection as the federal agents initiated the emergency asset freeze protocols. It was a digital slaughter. One by one, Jamal's heavily leveraged bank accounts flashed red on my screen, indicating a total federal lockdown. His primary commercial operating account was frozen. His offshore holding companies were flagged and restricted. Even his personal platinum credit cards were immediately suspended by the issuing banks. In less than 3 minutes, Jamal was stripped of every single dollar he had stolen. He was completely and utterly bankrupt. I closed the laptop, sliding it safely into my leather briefcase. I grabbed my wooden medical cane, trusting my right arm to bear the heavy weight of my shattered body. I slowly maneuvered myself out of the dingy motel room, leaving the fake name and the cheap plastic key behind on the unmade bed. A black car was already waiting for me in the cracked asphalt parking lot, sent specifically by Thomas, to ensure my safe arrival at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The driver, a silent man, wearing a dark suit, stepped out and carefully helped me into the spacious back seat. He placed my wheelchair in the trunk, but I knew I would not be using it tonight. I refused to roll into that ballroom looking like a helpless victim. I would walk through those doors on my own 2 feet, even if it caused me excruciating physical agony. The luxurious car pulled away from the curb, speeding toward the glittering downtown skyline. As we navigated the busy winter streets, my mind drifted back to the opulent ballroom. I knew exactly what was happening at the gala, right at this very moment. Madison was likely floating through the wealthy crowd, sipping vintage champagne and accepting endless compliments on her designer dress. Beverly was undoubtedly cornering local politicians, bragging loudly about her brilliant billionaire son-in-law. And Jamal was standing near the center stage, eagerly checking his expensive watch, waiting for Thomas to arrive. They were completely intoxicated by their own fabricated success, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic financial avalanche rapidly descending upon them. They did not realize that the expensive caterers serving their gourmet food were currently receiving frantic phone calls from their banking representatives, informing them that Jamal's deposit checks had just violently bounced. They did not know that the hotel management was frantically running his corporate card on file for the ballroom rental fee, only to see a stark federal decline message flash across their payment terminals. The luxurious illusion was rapidly shattering behind the closed doors of the hotel kitchen and the management offices. The heavy scent of impending doom was already lingering in the air. The black car finally pulled up to the grand entrance of the luxurious downtown hotel. The towering glass doors gleamed brightly under the massive chandeliers of the main lobby. The driver quickly opened my door, offering a strong, supportive arm as I slowly pulled myself out of the leather seat. I gripped the handle of my wooden cane tightly, ignoring the sharp burning pain radiating up my heavily casted legs. I smoothed the wrinkles from my crisp black blazer and took a deep breath of the extremely freezing cold winter night air. The time for hiding was officially over. It was time to deliver the final devastating blow in person right now. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was a shimmering sea of absolute extravagance. My mother Beverly stood near the massive ice sculpture in the center of the room, absolutely dripping in rented designer diamonds. She held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, gesturing wildly as she entertained a circle of wealthy Chicago socialites and local politicians. "Oh, Jamal is simply a visionary," Beverly boasted, her voice carrying over the soft classical music played by the live string quartet. "He works incredibly hard for our family. And of course, my poor daughter Audrey, bless her heart, is completely incapable of managing her own affairs after her terrible accident." Jamal graciously stepped up to protect her assets. He is the absolute bedrock of this family. The wealthy socialites nodded in sympathetic agreement, completely captivated by her perfectly practiced performance of the grieving but resilient matriarch. They had absolutely no idea that the glittering diamonds on her neck were paid for by the stolen equity of my home, or that the visionary son-in-law she was so proudly praising was a desperate, violent criminal. While Beverly continued to spin her intricate web of lies inside the warm, luxurious ballroom, a very different scene was quietly unfolding in the freezing darkness outside. A convoy of 6 massive black sports utility vehicles turned onto the avenue, moving with coordinated military precision. They did not use sirens or flashing emergency lights. They simply glided through the winter night like shadows, pulling into the circular driveway of the Grand Hotel and completely blocking all the primary exits. The heavily armed teams moved with an incredible deadly silence, completely securing the entire building perimeter within just a few short seconds. The valet attendants froze in absolute shock as fierce-looking federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters across their backs, simultaneously stepped out of the vehicles. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Harrison, walked directly over to my car and opened the rear door. "Are you ready for this, Audrey?" he asked, his voice low and intensely serious. I gripped the smooth wooden handle of my cane and nodded once. I shifted my weight forward, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood to keep from crying out as the searing agony shot up my shattered legs. I pulled myself out of the luxurious leather seat and stood completely upright on the freezing pavement. I was flanked instantly by 4 armed agents, forming an impenetrable human shield around my fragile body. I did not look like the completely broken, helpless victim my family had so eagerly described to their wealthy guests. I wore my sharp-tailored black business suit, my spine completely straight, and my eyes burning with relentless, absolute fury. "Let us go," I told Agent Harrison, my voice completely steady. "Let us permanently end this massive, pathetic charade." We walked through the towering glass doors of the hotel lobby, moving as one massive, intimidating force. The opulent lobby was instantly silenced. Wealthy guests in expensive evening gowns and sharp tuxedos physically backed away, pressing themselves securely against the polished marble walls as our tactical formation marched decisively toward the grand ballroom. The hotel general manager, completely panicked by the sudden massive federal presence, rushed forward, waving his hands desperately, trying to intercept us. "You cannot just march in there," the manager protested, his voice squeaking with intense fear. "That is a highly exclusive private corporate gala, and you are ruining it completely." Agent Harrison did not even slow his relentless pace down. He simply reached into his dark jacket and flashed a federal search and seizure warrant directly in the manager's pale, sweating face. "It is an active federal crime scene now," Harrison corrected coldly, pushing past the trembling man. We reached the massive gilded double doors of the primary ballroom. I could hear the faint sound of the live string quartet and the low hum of hundreds of wealthy guests, completely oblivious to the absolute destruction waiting just inches away. I paused for a fraction of a second, placing my hand flat against the heavy cold wood of the door. Inside that room, my sister Madison was anticipating my pathetic arrival, hoping I would crawl in and beg for $10,000. Inside that room, Jamal was eagerly waiting for a massive $50 million check from Thomas to permanently erase his massive mountain of criminal debt. They thought they had entirely rewritten my reality. They thought they had permanently erased my future. I tightened my absolute grip on my wooden cane and looked directly up at the tall federal agent standing firmly beside me. It is time to let them finally see me. Push the doors wide open, I commanded softly. Agent Harrison nodded firmly and signaled his men. Two heavily armored federal agents pushed the massive gilded doors completely open. The heavy wood slammed against the marble walls with a deafening crack that instantly silenced the elegant string quartet. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned their heads in absolute shock. The low hum of polite conversation vanished, replaced by loud gasps of pure horror as the tactical federal team marched directly into the center of the lavish ballroom. I walked right behind them, slowly leaning very heavily on my wooden cane. Every single step sent a fresh wave of blinding agony through my shattered legs, but I kept my spine perfectly straight and my chin held high. I was not the broken victim they expected. At the far end of the ballroom, Jamal was standing proudly on the elevated main stage. He was holding a crystal microphone, flashing his perfectly practiced and highly charismatic smile directly to the local news cameras. Madison stood right beside him, wearing her custom designer gown, looking like absolute royalty. They were just seconds away from officially welcoming Thomas to the stage to receive the massive $50 million investment check. When the doors slammed open, Jamal's fake smile instantly froze. His eyes locked onto the federal windbreakers, and then they found me. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and terrified. Madison dropped her expensive crystal champagne flute. It shattered loudly against the polished wooden stage floor. Jamal quickly realized that his entire fraudulent empire was actively collapsing in front of live television cameras. He desperately tried to regain control of the narrative. "Security!" he yelled into the microphone, his voice echoing frantically across the silent ballroom. "We have a major security breach. My sister-in-law is severely mentally unwell. She has recently suffered massive brain damage from a terrible car accident, and she does not know what she is doing. Guards, please escort her out of this private event immediately before she hurts herself." He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, trying to maintain his fabricated facade of the deeply concerned patriarch. Two large private security guards wearing black suits stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of how to handle a woman walking with a medical cane while surrounded by heavily armed federal agents. Agent Harrison stepped firmly in front of me, resting his hand casually on his tactical belt. "I highly suggest you tell your private guards to stand down right now," Harrison announced, his voice booming through the silent room without needing a microphone. "We are executing a federal seizure. Anyone who interferes will be immediately arrested for obstructing a federal investigation." The private guards instantly backed away, raising their hands in complete surrender. Jamal gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles turning completely white. He looked frantically into the front row of the audience, searching desperately for his wealthy savior. "Thomas, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking with intense panic. "Please tell these officers there has been a massive misunderstanding. We are finalizing our legal partnership tonight. Show them the investment contracts." Thomas slowly stood up from his front row table. He casually buttoned his expensive tailored suit jacket and walked up the short steps onto the elevated stage. He did not look panicked or confused. He looked incredibly calm and highly dangerous. Jamal let out a loud sigh of relief, stepping aside to let the billionaire venture capitalist take the center stage. Thomas reached out and took the crystal microphone directly from Jamal's trembling hand. "Thank you, Jamal." Thomas said, his deep voice resonating smoothly through the massive speakers. But we will not be finalizing any financial partnership tonight or ever. In fact, I am not here to hand you a $50 million check. I am here to personally witness your absolute destruction. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked whispers. Madison tightly grabbed Jamal's arm, her eyes wide with total, absolute disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Thomas, Jamal stammered, taking a terrified step backward. "You said you completed the final background check on my corporate ledger. You said my financial portfolio was completely flawless. I did complete the background check," Thomas replied, his tone turning completely ruthless. "But I do not use standard corporate auditors when I suspect someone is running a massive criminal Ponzi scheme. I use the absolute best talent in the industry. I need an expert who can completely dismantle a fraudulent network from the inside out." Thomas turned away from Jamal and looked directly across the silent ballroom right at me. He raised his hand, gesturing toward where I stood, flanked by the federal agents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "please allow me to formally introduce my lead financial fraud investigator, Audrey." The ballroom turned toward the back doors where I was standing, hundreds of eyes locked onto my battered frame, plaster casts, and wooden cane. The silence was absolute, heavy with profound confusion and dread. Jamal looked like he had been physically struck. He staggered back against the podium, gripping the edges until his knuckles turned white. Thomas did not give him a single second to recover or fabricate another lie. Thomas simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers, signaling the visual technicians stationed in the control booth. The soft classical music was abruptly cut off. The massive high-definition LED screens positioned behind the main stage flickered to life. The screens had been set up to display the logo of Jamal's fake firm. Instead, they suddenly broadcast the raw dashcam footage I had decrypted in the motel room. The digital timestamp of Christmas Eve glowed brightly in the corner. The massive screens showed the dark, icy highway. The audience watched in silence as my silver vehicle appeared on the display. Then the black truck with Jamal's corporate logo, bolted to the tailgate, accelerated into the frame. The speakers mounted around the ballroom amplified the terrifying roar of the truck's heavy engine. The crowd watched the truck intentionally ram into the back of my vehicle. They watched my car lift off the ground, spin out of control, and smash into the concrete barrier. The ballroom erupted into sheer, absolute chaos. Several women screamed in pure horror. Men shouted, pointing directly at the stage. The local financial news crew, realizing they were broadcasting the explosive exposure of an attempted murder on live television, quickly swung their heavy cameras away from the stage and focused entirely on the massive LED screens. Madison let out a piercing shriek, covering her mouth with both hands as she stared at the undeniable footage of her husband attempting to slaughter her own sister. Jamal scrambled wildly across the stage, waving his arms at the technical booth. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with intense panic. "That is completely fabricated. It is a deep-fake video. Turn the screens off right now." But the technicians completely ignored him. The video looped, playing the violent collision over and over again for the wealthy Chicago elite to witness. The federal agents surrounding me stepped forward, their hands resting firmly on their tactical belts, securing the perimeter as the wealthy guests frantically scrambled away from the main stage. The beautiful illusion of Jamal's billionaire lifestyle had just been violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Suddenly, the thick crowd of panicking socialites violently parted. My mother Beverly pushed her way through the chaotic mass of people. Her face was flushed dark red with absolute unhinged fury. The heavy designer diamonds around her neck sparkled under the grand chandeliers as she marched directly toward the federal barricade. She was completely trapped in her own severe delusion, entirely unwilling to accept that her favorite son-in-law was a violent criminal. "You vicious, ungrateful liar!" Beverly shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing over the loud murmurs of the panicked crowd. She lunged directly at me, raising her manicured hand high into the air, fully intending to slap my bruised face right in front of the entire city. Agent Harrison immediately stepped sideways, using his broad shoulders to physically block her path. Beverly slammed into the federal agent, completely enraged. "You set him up!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You orchestrated this entire massive spectacle just to ruin Madison's special night because you are a miserable, jealous failure. Tell these armed men to leave my family alone right now." I did not even flinch. I looked at the woman who birthed me, feeling nothing but cold, professional detachment. I slowly reached deep into the inside pocket of my tailored black blazer. I pulled out a thick, folded legal document printed on official federal stationery. I stepped slightly around Agent Harrison and held the paper directly out to her. "I am not ruining your night, Mother." I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human emotion. "I am ruining your entire life." Beverly snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes darting across the bold black text. "What is this garbage?" she demanded. "It is an emergency foreclosure notice," I explained calmly, making sure my voice carried to the reporters. "The Securities and Exchange Commission just froze every single one of Jamal's accounts for massive corporate fraud. Because you legally pledged your entire pension and your suburban home as the primary guarantor for his predatory shadow loans, the banks have completely seized your assets. Your house is gone. Your money is entirely gone. By tomorrow morning, you will be completely homeless." Beverly stared at the federal seal on the foreclosure notice, her body trembling. The designer diamonds around her neck suddenly looked like a glittering noose. The horrific reality of her situation pierced through her wall of denial. She let out an agonizing scream that echoed over the roar of the crowd. Her knees buckled beneath her and she collapsed onto the polished marble floor of the ballroom. She tore at her hair, weeping hysterically, but not a single socialite stepped forward to help her. The Chicago elite simply stared down at her with unfiltered disgust, rapidly distancing themselves from the toxic wreckage of our family. On the elevated main stage, the final act of Jamal's absolute destruction was actively unfolding. Agent Harrison marched up the wooden steps, flanked by 3 heavily armed tactical officers. Jamal desperately tried to scramble backward, completely abandoning his charismatic billionaire persona. He looked like a cornered, terrified animal. "Put your hands behind your back right now," Agent Harrison barked, drawing his standard-issue firearm and aiming it directly at Jamal's chest. "You are under federal arrest for massive corporate wire fraud, extreme tax evasion, and the premeditated attempted murder of your sister-in-law." Jamal fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. He pleaded with the agents, begging them to look at his fake ledgers, but his pathetic cries fell on completely deaf ears. The cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists with a sharp, definitive click. The federal officers aggressively hauled him to his feet, forcefully dragging the ruined visionary off the stage and toward the service elevators. Madison watched her husband being hauled away like common garbage, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She quickly turned her back on him, desperately trying to blend into the scattering crowd of wealthy guests. She thought her designer gown and her fake tears would somehow grant her immunity. She was completely wrong. A female federal agent stepped directly into her path, forcefully grabbing her bare shoulder. "You are not going anywhere," Madison, the agent stated coldly. "You are under arrest for federal conspiracy and the deliberate forgery of a medical power of attorney." Madison shrieked, thrashing wildly against the agent's iron grip. "I did not do anything wrong," she screamed defensively. "Jamal manipulated me. I am a victim too." She looked frantically across the ballroom, her tear-streaked face locking directly onto mine. "Audrey, please help me," she begged. "I am your sister." I stood perfectly still, leaning heavily on my wooden medical cane. I looked at the sister I had financially supported for my entire adult life, the sister who had eagerly stolen my multi-million-dollar penthouse while I was fighting for my life in a coma. "You made your choice, Madison," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "Now you get to live with the absolute consequences." The female agent swiftly cuffed Madison's wrists, completely ignoring her loud, pathetic wailing, and dragged her away to join her husband in federal custody. The grand ballroom was now a massive, chaotic crime scene. Thomas walked slowly down the stage steps and stopped right beside me. He looked around at the total devastation we had orchestrated together, a highly satisfied smile playing on his lips. "You did spectacular work tonight," Audrey Thomas said quietly. "Let us get you out of here." I turned my back on my weeping mother and the shattered remnants of my abusive family. Thomas gently placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, guiding me out through the massive gilded doors and into the freezing winter night. We walked toward the waiting black car as the red and blue lights of federal vehicles illuminated the dark city street. I settled into the quiet leather seat, finally allowing myself to breathe. For my entire life, I believed that family was defined by shared blood and obligatory loyalty. I believed that if I just worked hard enough and gave them enough, they would eventually love me. But true family is not a biological trap. True family is not composed of the people who eagerly plan your funeral while stealing your home. True family is defined by the absolute people who show up when you are completely broken, the people who stand beside you in the freezing darkness and help you rebuild your life from the absolute ashes. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to permanently cut ties with toxic relatives to save your own life? Tell me about your experiences in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of ultimate survival and sweet revenge. Remember to always guard your heart, protect your assets, and never let anyone make you feel like a victim. Stay incredibly strong.